Hello.
Hello.
Sustainability and Resiliency Manager for Mecklenburg County. I want to confirm that everyone can hear us online. Ebenezer, can you chat me back real quick? May not be listening. Awesome. Ryan can hear us.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, we're good. Next, I will entertain a motion to approve the January 10th, 2023 meeting minutes.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, seconded by Commissioner Jarrell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries and the minutes are approved. I will now recognize Jeff Smithberger, Director of Solid Waste, to present and give us an update from Solid Waste. And just remind everyone to be mindful that this agenda is packed. So we're gonna try and get to everything.
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you.
I will be very, as quickly
I know.
as I can.
Thank you.
Here this afternoon, I am Jeff Smithberger. I'm the Solid Waste Director for Mecklenburg County. We're here this afternoon to talk about really three topics. Our enhanced recycling program that we've started, the EPA grant that will be submitted today to the United States EPA. And there was a question that had come up about school recycling, specifically around food waste and composting. So I'll try to address all those as we move through. Next slide, please. The enhanced recycling program is one that really got started from our discussions with this committee more than a year ago. This committee talked to us about what we could recycle more, what waste reduction techniques could we do. We went back to our Waste Management Advisory Board. We put our heads together and came up with several different methodologies, and one we call enhanced recycling. Because of the limitations at our current MRF, the material recycling facility, we are limited on the things that we can put through there based upon the mechanical equipment that we have. So we came back with a program that we call enhanced recycling, and we're doing that at all of our full service recycling facilities. We are now recycling expanded polystyrene foam, hard and soft back books, shredded paper, and textile recycling. Next slide. We started this in mid-November of 22. And we started with our new recycling foam program. Now, many people call it styrofoam, but technically it's not styrofoam because styrofoam is a branded name, and styrofoam generally has components in it that are make it non-burnable. So we don't advertise we do styrofoam, but still many people say it's styrofoam, but it's really expanded polystyrene. The white rigid foam materials that come when you buy a new microwave or a television set. We came up with the storyline that we would have a foam eating dinosaur. His name is Fomosaurus Rex, and Fomosaurus Rex wants you to feed him because he thrives on eating foam. But really, in reality, what we do is we take the foam that we get, we run it through an expanded densification machine, and we make ingots of polystyrene out of that. We received a $50,000 grant from the foam packaging industry that paid for one of the foam densifying machines. And we repurposed old dumpster cans that we had. The can that you see up there had a life. It started in Mecklenburg County about 20 years ago. It was blue and it was used for collecting single stream recyclables. We worked with our contract that we have with the Center for Employment Opportunities, CEO, and those folks worked hand in hand with us, and you'll see some photographs in here in a few minutes about how they worked with us to repurpose these cans. So moving over and switching to expanded polystyrene required that we have individual locations that we separate this. So this material is being collected on a source separated basis. And then we also use CEO to help us process the foam. Here you see pictures inside of our shop at Hickory Grove where foam has been dropped off, and the workers from CEO are feeding this foam into the densifying machine. That one picture sort of on the bottom right shows what our shop looks like after a full load of one of these cans comes in. Next slide. Some of the program metrics, we have been much more successful than we ever dreamed, which is a good thing. Since program start, we have been averaging about 10 of these full 34-yard dumpsters per week. The North Mech facility is the busiest. We can fill up 2 of these cans on a single Saturday afternoon at North Mech. So we've had to repurpose even more of the cans and get those painted up and stickered up. But since program start, which was in the middle of November, we've processed over 80 full cans of this material. It's not a significant weight volume, but it's a tremendous volume that stays out of our landfill. And so that's really the thing that we're concentrating on, because landfills are never really measured by weight, they're measured by volume. And so far, we've saved about 2,500 yards of airspace in a landfill doing this. That's about 85 full garbage trucks. This is a huge program for us. What you see on the right are the ingots that we have processed. We are putting them in palletized form, and when we get a full truckload, we will ship them out. Each one of those pallets have the weight attached to them. It's kind of hard to read on this slide, but the one on the left is about 1,500 pounds. The one on the right is 1,460 pounds. These are heavy things. And generally, each pallet that you see here is the contents of about 6 or 8 of the full dumpsters. It takes a lot of dumpsters to make that material. It's a very popular program with the folks that are using our systems. We've also rolled out hard and soft back book collection separately. Now, we realize that some of our books that we get are reusable. So we work with a group called Promising Pages, and we repurpose a lot of those. At some of our locations, we also have had the ability to collect children's books separately, and Promising Pages takes those children's books and then they repurpose them back into the community. Many of our other books we find have been molded, or they've had water damage. And so those books get shredded and then turned into mixed paper and then are returned to the paper recycling market. So it's also been a very good program and well received by our residents. We typically ask folks to put these things in Gaylord boxes, and this is a picture that we have posted up on our website. Our website now has a specific location just for enhanced recycling, and it talks about all the things that I'm sharing with you today. Next one, if you would. We've already on shredded paper. We also collect those separately in Gaylord boxes. We're averaging 6 Gaylord boxes of shredded paper a month. These are paper shreds that people have already shredded. We can't take those at our MRF, even though paper is recyclable, because the shredded paper is just too small. It falls through the screens and it winds up with the glass materials that we get. So shredded paper, when you put it in your regular recycling bin at home, will wind up as glass, and we have to pull it back out of there, and it contaminates that. And so we're doing 6 Gaylords per month of shredded paper and about 8 Gaylords per month of books. The next one we have is one that we were a little delayed in rolling out. We rolled this one out in January just because it took longer to get the specialized boxes. But we collect textiles, and the textile program rolled out in January. And at the end of January, it surprised me that we got about 4,700 pounds of textiles in. These textiles are reused if they can be repurposed as clothing, and if they can't be repurposed as clothing because they've been ripped or torn or for whatever purpose, they're ground up and they're used either as animal bedding, or they're used in a process that turns them back into rags after they go through bleaching. So we're getting well over 2.5 tons of this material. I want to be clear that our website asks people if they have purposeful recycling that can be reused to take it to a donation place like a Goodwill or a Salvation Army. Primarily the things that we're getting are those things that cannot be accepted at a Goodwill or Salvation Army. Next one, I want to talk a little bit about CEO thanks. We've really found a great partnership by working with the Center for Employment Opportunities. The picture on the left shows one of their workers grinding down one of the old blue bins that we have. We turned those bins on their side. They painted the top of these bins white to reflect sunlight, because we want to also make sure that that we're not a heat sink to attract heat to these metal bins. So something working with the Cool Counties initiative, we went through and painted the top of these white. The bottom of the cans are painted black with the dinosaur image on them. We didn't want to paint the top black because we knew that they would be a heat sink, suck up a lot of heat on a hot Carolina day. And we also didn't want to make sure that we didn't get anybody burned because the cans will get hot. But here, the CEO crew, we treated them to a pizza party. And thank you lunch for doing 10 of these cans. And so it was something that we repurposed that truly goes on with our mantra of reducing, reusing, and recycling. This is what the refreshed can looks like. There it is on a truck. The other one on the left is on the ground. And Fomosaurus Rex is saying, more foam, feed me, please. All right. EPA grant update. We're working on a grant that is due today. And when I leave here, I will be going back to oversee the last bits and pieces of this. But it has been an interesting process. The infrastructure grant has a maximum of $4 million. The education and outreach grant has a maximum of $2 million. They are technically two separate grants. The permission to apply for the grants went to the Board of County Commissioners at the February 7th meeting. And we're in the process of getting everything submitted today, and I'll give you a high-level overview of what we're doing. Both, again, as I said, are due today. The infrastructure grant is we're partnering with our friends in Park and Rec, and we're making a Monroe Road recycling park. Now, what you see here is the entirety of that project, but my piece for the recycling center is sort of in the lower middle. It says recycling center, and it's shown as sort of the very dark green area. It's about 1.5 acres, and it will be a recycling only center that will be staffed, where we will accept bottles and cans and glass and cardboard and paper, electronics, paints, oil-based and latex-based paints. This will have a component that will also be a household hazardous waste collection center. It will not accept trash. It will only be recycling. We're also working with Park and Rec on that to have centers and kiosks located throughout the walking trails that will talk about recycling. We are going to be asking for about $2.5 million from the EPA for construction of this. And this is the layout of the proposed center that we have. We will also be rolling this out to the community to describe to the community what we are proposing. Unfortunately, the grant is due today. And so our rollouts to the community will be happening in the next month or so. So I hate that we have to get ahead of the community rollout, but to meet the issuance of the grant, this is how things have aligned up. Education and outreach. We're also planning on working with Innovation Charlotte on partnering to enhance things at the Innovation Barn. We would like the Innovation Barn to be a recycling learning center. It would then educate residents in our community as well as neighboring communities that use our MRF about the circular economy as well as recycling. They have a large space over there at the Innovation Barn, and we've talked with those good folks. The expected cost is between 1.5 and 2.0 million. 2.0 is the maximum amount. And so right now, as we're going through this, we're looking at educational portions that would be very visual and hands-on type displays. The folks at Innovation Barn had contracted with a architect engineer to come up with what they envision to be very interactive type displays. And these are ideas, but they're not wedded in stone at this point. We've also talked with Innovation Barn about specifically reaching out with CMS schools. One of the things that they are also proposing is that they would have a mobile education center that would roll out to both disadvantaged areas of our community as well as the schools. So if schools folks can't come to us, we can reach out to them. School recycling and food waste. I'm going through this pretty quickly, but we in Mecklenburg County Solid Waste provide the collection of trash and recyclables to all CMS and CPCC schools. We do that through an interjurisdictional memorandum of understanding. Now, this includes our standard portfolio of recyclable right items: cardboard, paper, plastic bottles, jugs, aluminum, steel cans, cartons, glass bottles. These are the same things that are recycled at schools that are recycled at home. Next slide. Now, the school system, we worked with them before on organic waste, meaning the food waste part. And I'll slow down for a second because this one gets a little bit more complicated. But we used to have 22 schools that were recycling food waste materials. Those food waste materials were collected separately by the staff in the cafeteria, both on what I call the front end, meaning where the students were, and then on the back end where the food was prepared. The pandemic sort of broke that model. And what happened is that the schools were not meeting in person. The schools, when they came back, were constrained with the number of employees and staff, and they just didn't have the resources. And unfortunately, at this time, the schools are not collecting any food waste from any of the schools. Now, schools are still recycling, but there's no longer a school's food waste collection component. My group integrates with the schools, and it's really up to the school and the way that the schools apparently are broken down. From my understanding, it's really a decision from a school-based management system that the principal at that school is really the one that sets the tone and temper of the things that will go on at those schools. But when we have reached out to the folks that work in the food preparation areas, what they are telling us at this point in time, they simply just don't have the resources to do that. Now, I will say that doing the front end collection of food materials from the students is a big and heavy lift. It is a lot of work to make sure that the students do this correctly. On the back end, it's also a heavier lift because it has to go to a separate can. The janitorial staff have to be trained differently. At this point in time, my group will offer those services, but we are not the ones that are twined with the school to physically do that. My group provides the service area. So I wanted to be clear on that. I'm not trying to throw anybody under any buses on this, but I understand their constraints. And even from my perspective of filling positions within my own organizations, it's very tough to find folks to fill and get back up to the pre-pandemic level. It's not saying that this will never happen, but at this juncture, the CMS has concentrated their efforts on child learning abilities and not so much on this part. Next slide. I hope that everyone had a happy Valentine's Day and that you remembered to recycle. This presentation was originally kind of going to be on Tuesday, which was Valentine's Day. So we threw the Valentine's recycling MOBUS in there for you. Thank you very much. That concludes my presentation.
I like this better.
I do too.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just have a couple questions. On all of these new things that we're doing, these new recycling items. Well, first of all, yay. I'm so glad that we are taking on more than we used to, and that hopefully this committee has had an impact, and that just feels awesome to know. And if you provide for it, they will come, right? And so I think it's tremendous that you're getting this great response from the community. So that is wonderful. I was just wondering, on each of those items that you mentioned, like the polystyrene, and you melt it down, you put it on a pallet. It's amazing that 6 or 8 trucks fit on a pallet after you melt it down. It's just wild. Can you just tell us what they do with those after? I mean, do we sell those things? Do we get money?
We eventually will, but what we have to do is accumulate a whole tractor trailer load at a time. And so once we accumulate that whole tractor trailer load, we will sell it on the open market. Right now, the expanded polystyrene comes in various grades. We are striving for a grade 1 polystyrene, and grade 1 typically sells around $600 per ton. And so, if we can put 20 tons of that on a tractor trailer, you do the quick math of, 20 tons times 600 and you come out with, the dollar amount for that. It does cost us money to do the processing. So, we're looking at it like it's a break even, but it is a tremendous amount of landfill space savings. And so that's the one thing that does have a higher price point. The shredded books, for example, sell for about $45 a ton. So there's a huge price difference for those. The expanded polystyrene generally is used for making other hard plastic things, everything from car baby seats to insides of things that are made of plastic. A lot of it is used for picture frames, believe it or not, because a lot of picture frames and plastic moldings are injection mold type plastics. And so they get turned into those things.
Wow, I'm just so appreciative of this update, and I just really want to say how proud I am that we're doing all of this, and I hope we can continue to create more opportunities. I love the park, the recycle park. Yay, that's awesome. I just think these are all educational, really hoping to, hope will impact the future by, educating people today and saving all that space in the landfill. It's just awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Commissioner Jarrell?
Thank you. Jeff, thanks for the presentation. As always, a few quick things. Number one, can we get information, just, you don't have to speak to it now, but can we get information on what the community engagement is going to look like with the residents off of Monroe Road, so that we can understand what that's going to look like and kind of get ahead of that? Two, I practically live at the Murph on Hickory Road. I'm there like all the time. So I'd be remiss if I did not say how great that team is out there. And I've only noticed and for the purposes of this, I'm just going to say styrofoam. I only noticed it a few weeks ago. So, but I know you said it's been there for a while, but and nonetheless, I noticed it a few weeks ago and it had its own separate little area. So now I'm putting my stuff over there. So that was great. And then the other thing, and I'll always tell you this every time you come in here, I appreciate the partnership with CEO and providing the opportunity to those folks like you do. I think that's fantastic. And I don't think that I've ever been at a presentation with you where you have not lifted that up so that the community knows what you and the team are doing. So I just want to tell you, thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
So on the styrofoam recycling, it's the least contaminated recycling I have ever seen, even on that slide. But I'm getting questions about, could Chick-fil-A bring the cups and the food containers? Yes or no?
Yes and no. If they're clean, yes, we will accept food containers if they're clean. And the biggest problem is that we found is that people are not cleaning them to the level that we need them clean to. So if you go out to the Mexican restaurant and it's still got some refried beans and other things left in it, we can't process those. Generally, cups are cleaner and we can accept cups. And so we will accept cups. We do advertise that we will accept food containers, but we really specify in bold that they must be perfectly clean.
Okay. And in unison with Commissioner Jarrell, on the EPA recycling grant, it looks like you're going to submit a footprint for the park. Given that we get the recycling grant, is that set in stone because we haven't had community engagement yet? Can you still switch the footprint around?
Likely, from my understanding, but I don't think that they would, for example, if we went double the size and asked for twice as much money, I don't think they would do that. But if we made small tweaks, I think that would be accepted.
Okay. That's important because you don't want the community to say, here we are, this is what you're getting.
Right.
Because they'll be surprised about some things. What is the school that we toured for food composting? Was it Charlotte Latin or Charlotte Country Day?
I honestly don't remember.
It was one of them, but it's a model for when we do go back with the 22 sites that we were working with at CMS, because the children were so engaged. It is a heavy lift, but it lasts forever. So I'm hoping that we get back to that. And then same as Commissioner Durrell, I'm at Compost Central and North Mech all the time. And the complaints I get are that we need more containers because they're using them so much, especially at North Mech. So thank you for your presentation. And I want to make sure Commissioner Meyer has a chance if she has any questions.
Thank you. The only thing I have, where is the park located, the recycle park?
It is near the intersection of Monroe Road and Idlewild.
Okay,
The exact address, I'm going from memory, is I believe 57 something Monroe Road. So it's in the 5700 block.
okay.
So the large cemetery that's at the corner of Monroe and Sharon Amity, it's across the street from the cemetery on the Monroe Road side
Okay.
as you're heading south.
Okay,
It used to be a former park building, so we had an office building over there that was demolished because it had mold issues. So it's a park property, but we're gonna partner with solid waste to get double duty out of it.
Thank you. All right. So Ms. Stanford,
Lee Jones has his hand raised online.
all right, I'm recognizing you, Lee Jones. Hello.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Chair Powell, Vice Chair Powell, and thank you everyone for give me an opportunity to speak. I really appreciate Park and Recreation, really appreciates the various partnerships that we have with Louisa, particularly in solid waste and other areas. And we've really enjoyed working with Jeff on these different initiatives. I just want to say, Jeff, that I was over at Park Road Park, not this past weekend, but last weekend to drop off some stuff from cleaning out a storage building, and I was just really amazed at how many people were there utilizing that facility. It works out really well. But someone asked me a question there and I couldn't answer it. I mean, I had on a Park and Recreation hat, so I got to remember not to wear it on the weekends. No, just kidding. But they did ask me a question. And the question was, they had some containers, looked like they had come from a bunch of restaurants. Like you get takeout and at the bottom of the container is black, the top of it is translucent clear. And then they said they had some deli containers that they buy, pre-sliced meat at Harris Teeter, and they were saying, can they put that stuff into the dumps, into the recycling? And I wasn't sure. So I didn't know if you had talked about that earlier when you were going over some of the materials that can be taken, but I just wanted to see if you understand what I'm describing and if you all take that sort of material.
Well, thanks for the question. I'll answer real quickly. No, we don't. That's a polypropylene type of material. It's completely different. Innovation Barn does take those materials separately. They have a special place where they can process those. And so what we do is we try to steer people to take those materials over to the Innovation Barn, especially if they have large amounts of them and they're clean.
Thank you. This person had like 4 boxes. I mean, he said he had been saving them to put screws and things like that in. And he said he just didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't want to tell him he could put it there, but I told him I would check that he should go online and see. And so how would you get in touch with that entity? I mean, should we place signage or they just get it from your website or what?
Yeah, our website currently has the information. I'll put a plug in right now, wipeoutwaste.com. We have information about all different types, and it also directs people back to the Envision Barn with Envision Charlotte. We have some of our collection containers also at the Innovation Barn with Innovation Charlotte, and they are the only people I am aware of in this area that will take that type of material for repurposing.
Thank you so much. That concludes my questions.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you. Just one more quick question on the textile recycling. And I'm going to tell you that I went and recycled some fabrics and things at the foxhole. But what I'm not going to tell you until you tell me is it okay for it to be in a plastic bag when you put it in the blue bins, or are you supposed to like rip it open and put all the stuff in? It doesn't give you anything on the signage. So that's a little criticism. Like it doesn't say what to do.
Good point. We'll try to get that clarified, but we don't like plastic bags in anything. And so our system is generally geared around not having plastic bags. We want things clean, loose, and dry, those things to remember. And so I'll try to make sure that our signage gets modified to reflect that. But there's no reason to, put it in there with the plastic bag. Now, if you do, it's not going to break the system, because I will tell you, because it doesn't go through our MRF, it goes through a separate process, but we still prefer it not to have plastic bags.
Okay, thank you. That answers the question.
Thank you. So we really appreciate you, and we're going to move on to cyanobacteria update. So I will now recognize Chris Matthews, who is the Division Director for Nature Preserves and Natural Resources.
Thanks for having me. I have, again, Bert Lynn and Greg Clemmer with me today. So we got a full company here to answer any questions that you have. So let's dive right into it. Pond maintenance, we'll go through a little introduction about kind of why we're here and talking about it, a timeline about some of the things that have happened in the past couple of years. We have done a study. We're going to provide you with some study results of what we found, some cost considerations and recommendations moving forward. And I think we have some good news for you at the end. So we'll talk about that. So what is cyanobacteria? It's blue-green algae. These are small organisms that we find in our lakes and streams all the time. However, under certain conditions, they can become overabundant and they can create really nasty looking situations like you see. I'm not aware whose hand that is. I always get asked whose hand is that. It's not my hand. But when this occurs, the blue-green algae forms these mats on top of the water, and it can discolor the water and produce a really bad smell. And the reason for this is phosphorus. So phosphorus is an element that we all know really well. When we fertilize our yards, it makes our grass turn green. And it's necessary for plants to grow. However, what happens when you get too much phosphorus in the system, it can create, the algae will take advantage of that and it will overgrow in its habitat. And so phosphorus can come from a lot of different sources, but animal waste is a big source. Leaves and grass clippings, we know people tend to dispose of those in creeks and streams sometimes. If you over fertilize and you don't follow the directions, that can end up in our creeks and streams. And we also have instances sometimes where we have a failed sewer or septic system that can leak stuff into the environment, and there's a lot of phosphorus associated with that. So the problem with blue-green algae is that when it becomes overabundant, there are chemicals in the blue-green algae that are actually can be quite dangerous. And so exposure to these toxins can cause a whole variety of issues, and you can see the list there. Skin irritation, nausea, vomiting, and in some cases, it can be detrimental to the health of wildlife and pets specifically. And so on the next slide, we'll show you kind of an idea of how this particular situation really kind of came about. So in 2019, there was a newspaper article that came out in Wilmington about 3 dogs that went swimming in a pond, and the dogs ingested and came into contact with the blue-green algae, and the 3 dogs ended up passing away. So this kind of became a local news story. However, on the next slide, you'll see that a couple of days later, CNN picked it up. It became a nationwide story. Park and Rec and Louisa had a conversation a couple of days later, and we said, hey, you know what, we probably should be a little proactive here, and let's go out and start testing our ponds and make sure that we find out if we have blue-green algae issues. And we did. Commissioner Meyer made a request about this time last year for us to really start looking into it, which was kind of the basis for us doing a study. I was here almost a year ago talking with you guys about blue-green algae. We did hire a consultant at the beginning of the fiscal year, and they did a study on the Freedom Park Pond and the Park Road Park Pond, which are both in Commissioner Meyer's district. And then last week, we did a presentation to the executive team about the results of our finding, and we'll give you an update on kind of what happened after that presentation. In the meantime, every year, every summer since 2019, we have put these signs up at every lake, pond that has tested positive. So we've partnered with Louisa Water Quality. They've been really cool to go out and test our ponds for us. And whenever we find a pond that has elevated levels of cyanobacteria, we'll put these signs up. Typically, these signs will go up sometime in the summer, like June. And they typically don't come down until October or November. So it's 4, 5, 6 months sometimes where we're detecting elevated levels of cyanobacteria. And it's been a local news story. So here's one from BT that talked about the Park Road Park Pond. The next one is Charlotte Observer had a big article about it. The next one is WCCB, I believe. They had a big article about it. So we tested positive for 8 ponds in 2019. And so this is kind of a big deal for us. We know we have an issue. So in the summer, we contracted with Solitude Lake Management. We asked them to go out and take a look at Freedom Park and Park Road Park ponds. They did some mapping for us. They inspected them. They did some water quality testing, and Greg was gracious enough to scramble and find some dollars in his budget to help make this happen. So here's the results. So Freedom Park Pond, we were able to determine that 28% of the volume of the pond is sediment. So it's not water. So almost 30%. That's equivalent to 630 dump trucks worth of sludge and muck in the bottom of Freedom Park. It's classified as eutrophic. Can you go to the next slide? I think I'll explain kind of what this means. So when you're looking at lakes, lakes can be categorized grossly into 3 different categories: oligotrophic, mesotrophic, and eutrophic. Oligotrophic lakes are lakes that are relatively free of sediment. So you can see all the way on the left, you can see how much water is in that lake. We usually find these in the mountains or glaciers or something like that, which are really clean. Mesotrophic lakes have a balance of water and sediment. So some of our larger lakes are like this. Lake Norman might be considered mesotrophic. So it's clean enough to swim in, but it doesn't have a lot of sediment in it. Eutrophic lakes, however, have a lot of sediment and a lot of nutrients in them. And while they're not necessarily unsafe to swim in sometimes, you just have to be really careful. So Lake Wiley is an example of a lake that has a lot of nutrients in it. It's still safe to swim in, but there are portions of Lake Wiley where I remember as a kid, you'd go swimming and your bathing suit would come out kind of dingy and brown because of all the stuff that's in the water. Okay, so back to Freedom Park. Freedom Park is considered eutrophic. We have come up with a temporary measure that Greg, actually, we've just contracted with a company to help us out with, and that is we are going to be applying Foslock, which is a chemical, it's like bags of chemicals, kind of, sort of, but you put them in the water, and basically what it does is it prevents the phosphorus from contacting with the bacteria. So the bacteria can't access the phosphorus. So it will help reduce the potential for blooms because we're gonna lock up the phosphorus. So we're actually gonna be putting Foslock down in Freedom Park and in Park Road Park ponds starting here really soon so we can get ahead of the warming weather. So that's gonna be a really good first step into helping to try and prevent some blooms from this summer. The study also recommended that once you get to 30% capacity volume in your ponds, that you should consider dredging. So Freedom Park's at 28, so we're getting pretty close. All right, so let's now look at Park Road Park Pond. So Park Road Park Pond is a little bit bigger. The pond is estimated to only have 23% of the sediment load, but I'll caveat that in a minute and I'll show you why that's a little bit different. However, because the pond is bigger, there's about 1,000 dump truck loads of sediment in Park Road Park Pond. Now, the consultant came back and indicated that Park Road Park is considered hyper eutrophic, which is, I didn't even have a slide for hyper eutrophic. It's like worse than eutrophic. So Park Road Park Pond is kind of a bad deal. Again, we're talking about a phospholog treatment here, and the consultant has recommended dredging, but only in a certain part. And this is kind of where we talk about it. So if you look at the slide here, this area to the right, which is directly adjacent to Park Road, there's a stream that comes in from the right. This area, if you were to go out and look, is extremely shallow. And so any kind of dredging that we're going to do is going to occur in here. A number of years ago, there was some work that was done on the left-hand side of the pond, which is really, really deep, and there's not a lot of sediment in there. So if when we're going to be doing phospholog, we're going to primarily focus on this area. And when we see these algal mat blooms in the summertime, we typically always see them in the shallow end of the pond. So just to give you an idea of what dredging encompasses, it's kind of a big deal. So you can use mechanical means like this long stick track hoe to get into the water body once it's drained, and you scoop the muck out. And then we'll show you what you have to do with the muck here in a minute. The other way to do it is that you can use a hydraulic dredge, which is like if you ever see like Gold Rush on Friday nights on Discovery Channel, where they're underwater, like sucking all the stuff up and getting gold. That's kind of what it's like here, except there's no gold to get. It's just nasty stuff on the bottom of the pond. And then regardless, what you have to do is you have to take those spoils and you put them into these giant bags so that you can dewater them, because they're really, really heavy, and you don't want to put a bunch of real loose, sloppy muck in the back of a dump truck and haul it off. You dewater it and greatly reduce the weight of it, and to a certain extent the volume, and then you can take the dewatered material and then put it into a dump truck and dispose of it. And so you can see that actually takes up quite an amount of space. So just so that you guys understand some of the costs associated with this, phospholog treatment, you can see the numbers for Freedom versus Park Road. It's not super expensive. We are considering some annual maintenance agreements, which we are kind of kicking around right now. So annually, if we're looking at just kind of putting a Band-Aid on it, which is the phospholog treatment, this is kind of what it's going to cost. However, if we're going to dredge, the numbers go up considerably. And as you can tell, Freedom Park is pretty close to being at the limit for recommended dredging, and certainly Park Road Park, at least on the right-hand side of the pond, definitely recommended for dredging, but it's a big number. However, the good news is we had the conversation with the executive team, and I don't know if Leslie, you want to provide any additional information, but we have been given the green light to go ahead and provide them the cost estimates so that they can look at putting it into the next CIP. So some considerations as we kind of look at how we're going to manage all this. Let's talk about dewatering. Where are we going to do it? Where are these big bags going to go? How many of them are we going to have? If we have just a couple of them, it's going to take a lot longer because we can't handle all the material. If we have a lot of them, it'll take less time, but it'll take up a lot of space. And as you guys know, Park Road Park and Freedom Park are two of our most popular parks, especially this time of year and in the summertime. The sediment analysis, we're going to have to look at the sediment and find out what that's going to look like. Some of this sediment could contain some materials that aren't all that great. And so we need to make sure that we find a facility like a landfill that's permitted to accept these materials, and they're going to want to know what they're getting. So we're probably going to have to do some testing of the sediment. Permits are going to be required. We're going to have to work with the state to acquire permits to do all this. And we got to find an approved disposal site. We're hoping that the landfill up at the Speedway can handle it. We're going to have to dive into it and spend some more time with the consultant trying to figure out where this stuff's going to go. Some of the timing on this is we're working through this since we really just kind of got the approval to move ahead with the investigation. Because these are major initiatives, we want to try and minimize the impact on the community and the park users. So if we can, if any way, shape or form, coordinate a dredging operation with some significant construction, then what we can do is not have a park closed down for a year and come back 2 years later and shut it down for something else. So we're trying to figure out a way to coordinate large projects with dredging at the same time. There is a potential project coming up in Freedom Park that Charlotte Water is going to do, where they're having to put some additional sewer lines in. And so there may be an opportunity to coordinate when they're putting the lines in Freedom Park and do the dredging at the same time. We're still kind of working through that. And then, of course, Park Road and Freedom Park are not our only ponds. We've got ponds all over the place, and we probably need to do kind of similar to what we did with Freedom Park and Park Road at the other ponds. So we're looking at what is our cost going to be to do these kind of studies throughout the system and look at our next 8 to 10 big ponds. And then based on what we find from those results, what's our treatment regime going to be? Is it going to be FOSLOC? Is it going to be dredging? Or maybe there's some other thing that we can do. So that's to come. We're not done now. We're using Freedom and Park Road as kind of our pilot projects. So here's kind of the timeline. So FOSLOC at Freedom and Park Road, we're going to do now. We're looking at potentially doing an annual service agreement starting next fiscal year. We'll look at doing the study for the remaining ponds that we have next fiscal year. If we are able to get the funding, then we'll look at starting on probably dredging Park Road Park Pond first, FY24, and then follow with Freedom Park a year later. I don't think we are going to have the bandwidth to do them both at the same time. So we'll do one and then we'll pivot over and do the other. It's possible that at Park Road, we have a major indoor pavilion project coming up, and we might be able to tie the dredging in association with that, because we're going to have to shut down part of the park when that indoor pavilion gets done. So more specifically, next slide. Some of the costs that we're looking at and timelines, specifically Park Road this time next year, Freedom Park the following fall. Our total projected cost right now is almost $5 million, and primarily because of the dredging. We're also having to put in there some money in case, for example, we get into Freedom Park and we have those concrete walls that go around. They might be damaged as part of this, and we might have to fix them. So there's a lot of considerations. How do the dump trucks access the ponds? What if we damage the pavement and the parking lot over Park Road? And so there's a lot of considerations here. This is not a real easy thing to do. And so we're just now starting that process of really trying to figure out exactly what it's gonna take to make this happen. But I think the good news is it's been recognized that we have a health issue, and that there's a commitment at the county manager's level and within Park and Rec to help fix it. And obviously our partners in Louisa are going to help too.
Before I go around for questions, I just think everybody is probably wondering about the potential toxicity of FOSLOC to animals and wildlife. Do you have any knowledge of that?
So of FOSLOC, is it
Because you know that people walking their dogs, let the dogs drink it, but wildlife also. So do you know anything about that?
So we were intentional in working with the consultant to say that whatever treatments that we use, we want to make sure that we're not going to be creating a worse situation. And so FOSLOC is a recognized industry standard treatment system for these specific types of situations. And we're not aware that they have additional harmful, tendencies to wildlife. Now, we will be posting signs as we're doing it, because everyone's going to want to know what we're doing. So we'll be making sure that we're talking about it, and public information is going to have to also will be on board with us to make sure that we're getting the word out as to what's happening. Because again, highly visited parks, and we want to make sure people know what's going on.
Thank you. Commissioner Altman.
Yeah, that was definitely a question of mine, and you said we are not aware, but I would want to have more research done to hear affirmatively.
We'll
as
pull,
we go forward.
we'll pull the information specifically for that and provide it to you.
You know, I have familiarity with much smaller ponds. But in my personal experience, they have to be maintained, even smaller ones, on a yearly basis. I mean, the leaves that we have in this community will cause the eutrophic graphic very shortly, because so much is falling from the sky, crowding out the water and putting material into any pond. And so I am surprised if we didn't already have maintenance agreements on all of our ponds. This seems like so foreseeable that if they haven't been dredged ever, and there's no sort of annual service agreement to keep them from becoming shallow from what falls from the sky, am I understanding that that's just not been happening? How have we gotten by this long without any of that maintenance?
So we have had annual service agreements to treat water quality and to do the fountains and the bubblers and those kinds of things. But the situation with blue-green algae has just recently become a big issue for us due probably to climate change. And so it has typically not been an issue for us up until 2018, 2019. And so you can see that because of the potential costs associated with this, it's not something that was normally able to be accommodated with our operating budget. So that's why we're having to do what we're doing now and do the studies and find out what it takes.
When you drain the water, if that ends up being the method to pursue, the likelihood, like when I've had to do this, you know, you got to save the fish, you got to evacuate the plants so that the fish and the plants can go back in. Like, how are you going to drain? If you drain these ponds, how are you going to save what's living there?
So we have worked closely with other organizations, specifically the city of Charlotte in years past, where they have had to do major pond or lake projects. And what we've done is we've been able to, in most cases, we have received fishes that were collected from the pond prior or during the draining process, and we have received them and put them so Beatty Pond, which is in Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell's backyard, received a bunch of fish from a big lake project that was done over off of Albemarle Road that the city was doing. So what we actually will end up doing is, for the fishes that are left in Freedom, Park Road is going to be a little different because we're not going to drain the entire pond, so the fish will actually have a place to go. But if we decide to drain the pond at Freedom Park, we'll collect whatever fishes are there and we'll find a suitable location to relocate them.
Okay, and if you bag up the material and you leach out the water and then you're left with the raw material, is that like toxic or is it good fertilizer? Like, what could that be? What could be, is that gonna have to go to a dump?
Until we ascertain what the conditions are like of that material, we don't know what the use of it is going to be, but it's likely going to end up in a landfill at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you. Is this the same blue-green cyano, what? Cyanobacteria, yeah. In photography, we have cyanotypes, and so I'm just like confused. So is that the same thing that's in Lake Wiley? Is that the, because it's much bigger?
So cyanobacteria is kind of a catch-all phrase for blue-green algae, but the blue-green algae issues in Lake Wiley are identical to what we find in our ponds. Whether it's the same species of bacteria, cyanobacteria, I'm not fully aware of, but the short answer is yes.
Okay, so is this like a looming future thing that we might have to dredge something as large as Lake Wiley?
I think that would be a conversation that Duke Power would have to, they're the ones that manage that facility, so they
okay.
would have to figure that out.
Okay, great. Because I know we've put out the signs and we've, told people not to use it. So, but it's up to them to maintain it. Okay. so obviously, prevention, like, is there, like, so I see all of the steps about treating it and an annual, an annual maintenance. Is that, would you consider annual maintenance the prevention, or is there other prevention steps?
So, yeah, I probably wasn't so clear about this. The primary source of phosphorus in these two ponds is the sediment. And so once we get the sediment out there, then we can get into an annual routine maintenance that will probably prevent this from happening for quite some time.
What does that look like? Can you just tell us briefly what does prevention look like?
So I don't know that we know all of the steps of what that's going to look like, but it could include fountains to aerate the water. It could include bubblers or mechanical things like that that are in the water. It could include a Foslock treatment, maybe not annually, maybe every 3 years, depending on what the conditions are like. It could include being a little more careful about fertilizer applications around some of our park grassed areas around these. So there's other things. Greg, did you have any other ideas about what that's going to look like?
Yeah, so currently right now, we do have a PM program on Freedom Park Road and Hornets Nest. But what we've been playing catch up on is what Chris making a presentation on the sediment. We've been fighting we're just losing battle. Currently, right now, we added bubblers at Freedom Park, Park Road Park, and at Hornets Nest to aerate the water and keep things moving. So you probably noticed over the couple of years, all of a sudden, see little bubblers pop up, you see fountains popping up. We make them decorative, but they're actually functional. Underneath the water in Freedom Park alone, there's 48 different underwater bubblers to keep air moving and oxygenate the water and everything. In addition to that, part of your PM program, we work with a company that kind of works on sometimes you'll see the ponds change colors because that's done on purpose to kind of help prevent some of the algae from growing. And they help us maintain that. In addition to that, they try to do some, like say, leaves and stuff, try to do as much as they can to clean things out. What the situation here is that's kind of what a typical PM program is. And they kind of check the pH levels, check what's going on, and we kind of go from there. What you're dealing with now is that this has been over many years. And so now it's kind of take the large approach, get it, reset it. And then you kind of do this type of pre-PM program with the aerators, checking the pH levels, and then adjusting whatever we have to do to make sure that we stay on top of it. So again, as Chris said, we have many ponds like the Cow Pond and other large ponds that we'll have to take a look at and see what other steps we can do.
Okay.
That's what a typical PM program is.
Okay, because when Chris mentioned, because of climate change, I just was trying to connect the dots on how does that contribute? Because I don't understand how that, but it's okay. I don't have to understand right now. But I do think that investing, to the return on investment would be, $5 million to do this for just 2 ponds. That's a lot of money. And so I just am saying, is it, it's cost effective if we can get these to the right point and then not, then do preventative maintenance to avoid it from happening again. And so I just would hate, so that's sort of a huge amount, right? To put on, like, whose budget does that come out of? Because we wouldn't want it to come out of like Parks and Rec budget. Could we take it from fund balance or?
Well, yeah. So as Chris noted, the team has been really effective in doing this and doing this right, and making sure that we have a good pathway to move forward. While I had seen it before, they did present again to the executive team. And collectively, there's this commitment to put it in our budget. So I wouldn't think that you don't have to worry about, is it going to be competing with what park may be making requests independent? It is a commitment that we need to do for the health and safety of our community. And we're just going to find it and figure out how it's going to be done.
Okay.
But we don't know that yet because we haven't even really started the sausage making for budget yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jarrell?
Chris, thanks. Couple things. So if we zoomed out and took like a comprehensive approach and looked at the county footprint, you know, I know we're from a micro level looking at Park Road and Freedom Park. What I guess I'm concerned with, can you help me, one, understand how many assets do we have from a comprehensive footprint that would be exposed to this, right? So obviously, there's different intervals at which we would have to deal with this in different parts of the county, but I guess I really, if you take ELAP and you put that in your mind, I want to make sure that we're prioritizing based on the greatest need, which I'm assuming that's what you're saying right here. We picked Myers District. Just kidding, just kidding. You know, I had to do it. But because Freedom and Park Road are at the highest risk right now, but we are going to put together a plan that says we're going to look at this comprehensively and prioritize from there. Am I fair saying that?
Yeah, so through the summer monitoring that's done with Louisa, Freedom Park Pond and Park Road Park Pond always have the blooms the longest. So they're our worst offenders.
Okay.
Which is why we're starting with those first. But certainly we're going to be looking at our other major pond assets, which occur at Reedy Creek Park and Nature Preserve, Hornets Nest, Beatty Park, Davy Park. We have several, I think we counted up like 8 to 10 pond units that we'll be looking at the ones that Louisa tests for us is a good way. And that way we'll be able to monitor the success long-term, you know, as we see this go on. And the climate change thing, what we're finding is that because we don't get the cold winters like we used to, the algae persists at a higher level for longer periods of time. And that's why it's more persistent.
So the final question I have, so thank you for that. I knew you guys were on it. I just had to put it out there.
I'm sorry, I've let be muted. I'm sorry.
And then the other thing, you showed a slide that showed 8 different ponds from like 2019. So do we know where they are? I mean, can the committee get an update on where the levels are with respect to those that were identified back in 2019 that was reflected on the slide?
Yeah, so we can go back and what I'll do is I'll get with water quality over at Louisa and I'll get the data for the past couple of years and because we're testing all the same ones every year. So we'll kind of show you kind of what is. We had 2019 was a particularly bad year for us where we had major impacts from blue-green algae. But the past couple of years, we really only seen it in just a few of them.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So just so everyone knows, I love when Commissioner Allman asks a question about what happens to the fish. Chris is a fishologist. So.
And he says fishes.
Fishologist is going to take care of the fish. And I really appreciate you, Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, asking about budget impact, because there are some surprises sometimes, like when you have something like this, and then all of a sudden it impacts your whole budget and you're like, oh, we didn't anticipate this. So like, we need to be really mindful of how this could impact their budget. Dredging, like regardless of what you find out about it, I hope that the contract, when we do the dredging, that we will only send waste to lined landfills. I think that needs to be part of the contract. Because you know there are the LCID landfills with no lining. And so we need to be leaders in that.
Yeah, I'm confident that this type of waste wouldn't be allowed in a non-line landfill. And I will ensure that it
I appreciate that.
goes
'Cause
to
it's
the place where it needs to.
stunning
Yeah.
that gets missed. And I know that you have tried, even before we were elected, to avert this avert the outcome. Like I'm thinking like you were part of the, putting the bubblers in. At some point in the past 10 years at, is it Freedom or Park Road Park? No, it'd be Greg. Yeah, yeah, so, yes,
We started the bubblers probably, I would say 8, 9 years ago at Freedom. And then we progressed over the years and started adding them to more and more places as we started to bring on my contractor to start saying, this will help, this will help, this will help. So we've been trying to combat this. I think we just got to a point where we're starting to lose. And so that's kind of where we're at now.
yeah, I think that's important for everyone to know that you've been working on this and it still wasn't enough. So I know I can call you guys for any more questions because we're kind of running short on time. But I do want to give Commissioner Meyer 2 minutes.
Okay, and I'll go fast.
Okay.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you so much, you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The park department, y'all really listen. I really appreciate it. I know this took a ton of time. Greg, do you know the bubbler at Parkwood Park is not, it's like the fountain's just kind of, bleh. It's not working.
There's 3 bubblers that are there on the front part, and then there's a larger fountain.
Mhm.
Occasionally it gets clogged with sediment that gets dumped in.
Okay,
And so our contractor, when that usually happens, they'll come over there, they'll take a little boat out and they clean up all the vents and it'll start to go.
okay,
But it's never gonna, if this was the water, it will never bubble higher than this. We
okay,
have a fountain that's actually on the other side that goes bigger. So
Okay.
just don't think, just because it's going this high, it's doing good. It's
Okay.
like very low, that's bad.
good to know. The Foslock is not being used now, correct? What is making the water in Freedom Park it's like a teal color? What is that treating? Is there a treatment being done at Freedom Park? Because sometimes it's a really peculiar
Yeah,
color.
so
Yes.
historically, we've used a product called Aqua Shade, which can turn the water green or blue depending on what color you use. And you think of it like sunscreen for your skin. So you put that, it's a dye essentially, and you put it in the water and it prevents sunlight from going all the way down through, which slows down the reproduction of cyanobacteria.
Oh, interesting. All right. And I'm really almost done. One more question. When you do the Park Road Park one on that side, since you're going to have all the equipment and it's going to be all that at that time, would it make sense to go ahead and do the whole pond? Even though it's at 23%
I think the other side of the pond, Park Road, correct?
in Park Road?
The other side, if you kind of look at the new dock area that we put in, there's a map up. We've done a lot of work out there. The new pier, little small pier, take an imaginary line and go down through there. As Chris said earlier, kind of it says duck pond. I think you can see what says duck pond.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, the small duck pond. There's a little pier that goes out. I can't.
So it's where the green
There you
is,
go.
right in the middle.
Right there you go. So there's kind of, you put an imaginary line there, as Chris said. I think there's also a little rock wall. It drops down and gets really deep. I think it's around 24 some odd feet deep, especially at that cylinder. It's very deep. I've been out there. So that side of the lake we're not concerned about that. It's the areas that were all the sediment. If you go where the at the end of where Park Road is, there's a outflow there that a lot of sediment, and it's just like if you're down on an inlet and you see like a delta and this stuff gets dumped in there because the ocean's coming in. Same concept. It's going there, and sediment from all the other storm drains are just going into that pond area, and that's the big concern area. And from the dock over, it's very shallow, and that's what we think is causing a lot of these issues.
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
How many years have you worked for Park and Rec, Greg?
I think I'm pushing 23, might hit 24, I think, in June.
Like, as I travel throughout the county, and the knowledge that you have of all, like every property is amazing. So, thank you. Ms. Stanford.
We have one question in the chat. I wanted to call out before we moved on. Drew Thrasher asked, were the cost estimates shown for dredging with draining of the ponds or the hydraulic option?
We have not determined means and methods yet.
Thank you.
So hopefully Drew could hear that.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on, and before you start, for invasive species update, I want to ask Commissioner Jarrell if you would like to say anything, because, you know, when we added this to the agenda, there's a reason that we added this to agenda.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. When we were in the retreat, we saw the presentation, Erin, that you gave us with respect to invasives and what the plan is now. And one of my asks was for us to take a look at it to see, you know, I guess, you know, to a certain degree, I have a concern because I feel like if we are redirecting resources, and I understand that the plan says that we're going to come back and try to remediate, I would really like to understand or explore if there's a way that this committee could take a look at maybe allocate or not allocating, I'm sorry, just really saying to our other colleagues that we recommend utilizing additional resources so that we can have a two-pronged approach going at this. Because we, right now, from what I see, we have a lot of community members that are in the invasives game now. They're doing a lot of work for us or helping and assisting. And so we can get more contractors on the ground if it's related to cost. I think we should explore the type of recommendation we may need to make from a fund balance perspective. And so that's why I was asking for it to come back and for us to possibly explore it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that backdrop. And I'm gonna, before Chris jumps in, just make sure that we have this context as well. And I know Chris will cover this in more detail. When we did the original Environmental Leadership Action Plan, we talked about scaling up, because one of the things that we're glad that this is a priority of the board. Staff has already had this as a priority, has been working even before there was additional funding placed for this action. One of the things that was immediately shared with me when we started doing this Environmental Leadership Action Plan was the capacity of the marketplace to scale up with us and to be able to ensure that they had the employees and the staff and the bandwidth and the like to do the level of treatment that we would want to do. So there was a correlation in our planning to look like what could the industry or the marketplace of the contractors do and their bandwidth along with what we were already doing at the staff level and like. But I know Chris will share with you some high level things to help you have that context. It's not that we're not wanting to do more, but we've got to be able to do it in tandem with the marketplace of the availability of the resources.
Sure.
Not funding resources, but the capacity resources. But Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
So I guess what may be helpful is to kind of describe our process so that you can understand a little bit better about how we prioritize and how we move around. And then as you further your budget discussions, you can determine, you know, what next steps are for you. So how do we know what we have? Well, so we have historical knowledge. We're out in and about in the parks and nature preserves all the time. So we kind of know where stuff is. When we're doing projects, when we're doing walking all of our boundaries, we take note of where stuff is. We're doing forest assessments, whatever, we mark everything down. We also have a pretty robust GIS study that's going on where we're looking at historical aerial photography. We're looking at LiDAR data. And all these things can help us understand how densely impacted our parks and nature preserves and greenways are. So we use a bunch of different stuff. We even one time came up with a list of parks, every one of our properties and what we believe the percent coverage was for invasive species. Some of our park properties are 60% covered and some of them are 3% covered, or Romare Bearden 0% because there's no invasives there. So we use a lot of things. Mecklenburg County is one of the leaders in the park and rec world for doing invasive species control. We do it on a scale that not many other agencies do from a park perspective. Now, there are other agencies like federal and state governments that do it, but from a park perspective, we're one of the leaders. There's only a very few other park systems in the United States that have a more robust system than us. Fairfax County, Virginia is one. that I know that they have a fairly robust program, but we're kind of leading the effort in this. So I think that's important because people are looking to us to help understand, what they need to do. So here's how we do a treatment. We'll identify a location and we'll take the monies that you guys have allocated for contractors and we'll send the contractor out there to do a treatment. In order for this to be long-term, and in order for it to be successful, we send the contractor back out to the same location 12 to 18 months later. Because the stuff keeps growing. You can't get it all the first time. You got to treat it. We come back and treat it again. And then we go back a third time to the exact same property with staff. And staff can then begin to manage these properties. So it's a three-tiered approach. It's not, we don't widgetize it. We're not like one and done and we take off. It's not like that. We have to continually monitor and manage it. So it takes a good long time to do it. So how do we set priorities? Well, so there's a couple ways that we do that. One is we try and do our best natural areas. We try and protect those. So areas where we know we have endangered species, where we have high quality forests, where we have resources, natural resources that we know are going to be dramatically impacted by invasives. A lot of these are in our nature preserves. We are focused on those because they're our highest quality natural areas. We're also beginning, now that we're beginning our new CIP and we have this invasive species process in place, any property that we're going to go in and do a significant park project on, whether it's a brand new build or whether it's one of our equity projects where we're going to go in and totally take out the old stuff and put the new stuff in, we're going to focus on those also for invasive species removal so that the residents don't just get new playground equipment, they get a whole brand new park. So we're going, once we understand what the CIP looks like and we know kind of where we are, we're going to make sure that we go in and get the invasives treated at the same time that the CIP is being done. So we'll be able to touch a lot of areas, especially in our Crescent and equity communities with those projects. We also have community input. So we have some residents, communities that are very, very interested in getting invasives taken care of. Latta Dilworth is an example. We don't have a lot of invasives over there, but the community has a lot of energy. So we have spent time over there helping them with invasives. And Evergreen is another example. So the community around Evergreen reached out to me and said, we want you guys here. I even went to a whole community meeting. There were like 30 people there that night. And they were like, we want you guys to come do this. So when we have a lot of energy around it, that's a place that we focus on as well, right? And then if there's an emergency need. So if we find that there's an invasive species and it's really taking over, or we have something like the emerald ash borer, which is not a plant, but it's an insect and we have to jump on it, then we could potentially use these funds to help go in and help control, that invasive species. So that's kind of how we're setting priorities now. And I think that it gives us an opportunity, especially with its next CIP, to begin to spread these projects around a little bit. So here are our challenges. Greenway properties are really tough because they're usually along creeks and streams. And when it floods, we get brand new seed coming in every single time. So we can spend a lot of money treating these greenway properties, but every time it floods, we get a whole brand new group of seeds out there. And so that is a really hard thing to deal with because you don't really see a lot of long-term change. We're acquiring new properties all the time. And you guys know really well, we're trying to spend our money and get, whenever we buy a new property, chances are almost 100% that we've got invasive species that we have to take care of. So if it's a park, if it's a nature preserve, whatever, that we know that that's something that we're going to be adding to our list. This round 3 maintenance, where we have staff go out and do it, as we start taking these properties down, that's going to put a load on staff. right now in natural resources in the nature preserves, we can handle taking care of it because our staff are used to working on those properties. But as we start taking down equity parcels and new parks and these communities reach out to us, if we don't commit to this long-term management, it won't be too much before those invasives just come back in. So we got to kind of keep that in mind too, as we grow our system, as we open up new parcels, it's going to take a greater, level of intensity for us to manage and maintain it. And quite frankly, it's a little bit better than it used to be, but retail sales of invasive species, either through some of the big box stores or some of the garden centers, continue to be problematic for us. I mean, people are still selling stuff and people are planting them in their yards, and it just kind of exacerbates the situation. So I think as you guys go through your budgeting process and think about how you want to do it, hopefully this helps you understand a little bit better about how we pick and choose and what some of our challenges are, not only now, but moving ahead as if we were to ramp the program up, kind of what that would look like on the back end.
And so before we move forward, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but my understanding is that when we saw that it was just evergreen that was treated, I think Commissioner Jarrell said, well, wait a minute, like we're putting all of this year's resources into evergreen. We have extra money if staff is prepared to do invasive removal in this fiscal year. Can we advocate, can we make a recommendation for that would help? Is that what, that's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, well, I think that's what you were addressing. I mean, that's.
Right, I think
I was saying,
it's,
and you
it's,
said
it's,
a capacity.
it's
It's an
I think
external
to the,
resource.
there's external resources, and as Chris was talking about the multi-year perspective. So if we say we're going to do more, it's not just this 1 year to do more. You've got to be mindful that you have to be able to do more for the next 2 years. And does the internal staff have the bandwidth to do it when we do more, knowing that they already have a plan to do more anyway, coupled with, does the marketplace, the contractors that we use for that first 2 years, can they also absorb doing more? So it's both. And I can't speak to I know when we started the first year, we had to give the contractors enough time to know how much more so they could staff up. We couldn't go on July 1 when we first started and say, could you start doing it tomorrow for us? Because they had the resources and capacity to do that. So we have to be able to be prepared both ways. And what does that look like? But Chris probably has more, he knows more about the external and internal, but I think he was trying to help you understand that it's not just, oh, we put more money and we do it in this single touch point and we're done. It's systemic things that we have to ensure the resources are there for, beyond just saying, okay, we've got more money in general fund. Can we put a little bit more money to do more? And that's only one-time funding. So it's more than one-time funding. They have to be planful of everything from that regards. But I guess you can speak to on the evergreen piece and why that was done, or the focus this year compared to others, coupled with the marketplace.
Yeah, so very quickly, we treat a lot of properties. We have specifically put our contractor dollars at evergreen this year because of the intensity and density. But staff, we have actually, when you add up all the acres that have been treated, both by the contractor and staff, we're in the hundreds of acres for this year. It's just the real intense stuff we let the contractor go in and do first. And so they're slogging through evergreen right now.
And then staff has to follow up on that. And so since we were only at one property, I think these are great questions that we are asking, that we have a natural resources staff that can follow up on the properties after the contractors are finished. And since we only did evergreen, doesn't it make sense with extra dollars to jump in and do some more now? Doesn't it make sense?
Right.
So I guess the best way for me to answer that question is if you guys decide to provide additional funding, we will figure out a way to make sure that we have a combination of staff and contractors lined up to make sure that we can accommodate whatever that level of effort is.
Okay,
And I feel pretty confident that we would be able to do it.
thank you. Commissioner Jarrell?
No, I think that's perfect. That's what we're trying to drive towards.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Commissioner Alvin?
One other thing I would say though, not to discourage you from doing that. Being mindful that if you put money in 1 year, that's a one-time thing. And that's on the list. So say in this year, I'm just using illustratively, they get 100. You put more money in, they're able to do 200. But that's only able to do that 200 now or additional 100 more for that 1 year. They still have to go back in year 2 and year 3. And you don't have resources to support them going back in year 2 and 3 to deal with the now 200 acres versus the 100, just illustratively. I'm not saying not to, but I'm helping. I want you to understand when you put money in for year 1, and if it's general fund money, which means it's only one time, they've got to figure out how do they continue to do this year 2 and year 3 with existing resources. Just be mindful of that.
I appreciate you mentioning that, and I think the staff will be mindful of that, and they'll choose they'll consider that in their prioritization. But I think now is the time, Commissioner Altman.
Well, I think we're out of time, so I will only say thank you. And for every dollar that we spend on this priority, millions, I think we've invested at this point. It seems crazy to me if we are not able to do outreach to the marketplace to discourage the use of invasives with our partners at Lowe's and wherever, and the community. I mean, in my family, my brother's all over invasives. It's like a religion for him. My mother thinks he's insane. She thinks he's radical and he's making stuff up. And she's a great person and she recycles religiously. So I just think if we don't educate our community to care and make aligned choices, we are like not throwing money down the toilet, but we are really working against our efforts if we are not also working on the supply side of invasives happening and coming in the marketplace.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell,
No questions. Thanks.
do you have any questions?
Madam Chair. Commissioner Michael.
I recognize.
Before we
recognize
leave, thank you.
Commissioner Jarrell?
So can I make a motion to recommend to the larger board that we take an additional 500,000 from fund balance?
What I would advise is that it is not advised. That doesn't mean that I can't stop you from doing what you want to do, but I wanted to tell you that because of the issues that we've had in the past about budget decisions and committees and which, though it wasn't before, I would encourage you to hold on to that and not make it a committee recommendation that you will want to make a budget request. Y'all are all there, y'all all supportive. When you get to that part in budget, make a recommendation of however you want to make that recommendation. You would be able to have your peers here support you in that recommendation, but to take an action about a budget decision in this environment is generally legally not recommended. But I've said what I've had to say.
Well, if you're gonna throw in the legal part, okay.
I'm not saying that you can't, but I'm just saying.
So his motion was not for next fiscal year, it was for this fiscal year.
Yeah, to add fund balance now.
Yes,
But it's still a
But it's
budget,
still a budget
it's still a
decision.
budget.
Okay.
So
So what you would do is you would just go to you would go in a regular session, add it as an agenda item. The process would be that if you were trying to take money in your current, now I don't know if they can use it in the current, but that's neither. If you're not trying to make, if it's FY24, you would do it during straw vote, whatever. You're talking about in the current
I was
year.
talking about now, like, let's do it now because
Okay.
we're focused on Evergreen now, and I just want to get some more resources.
It is now the way that the process that you would do to make that
Okay.
happen is you would add it as an action unto the next board meeting
Okay.
or whatever, however you would go through that process. And then you would get the support of the individuals here, assuming they would be okay with it.
I'm with you.
So would you like to modify that to make a recommendation to take this conversation to the full board?
Well, we'll just add it to the agenda.
Okay.
I mean, I think I can get two people to add it to
Just
the
get it-
agenda and we go from there.
Okay.
That is.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
It just, it delays it. There's like a delay after delay, so hopefully we can just get to it quickly.
I'm gonna ask Chris, if it's in this current fiscal year, and I don't know what y'all are thinking about, but in this fiscal year, will you be able to act on it now? Based on where the contracts are and everything like that?
Yes.
Okay, all
Good
right.
answer.
That was easy.
Okay,
Thank you.
if there,
Respect the
is there
process.
anything further from the committee?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell moves to adjourn. Commissioner Altman seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, thank you.